The town laughed when she built a church alone until it became their only shelter. The dust came first, not the usual Kansas grit that settled in your teeth and hair, but something darker, meaner. Hazel Pritchard stood on the half-finished roof of her church, hammer in hand, and watched the horizon turn the color of old blood. The wind carried voices from town, urgent and afraid, but she didn't climb down. Not yet. Below her, the skeleton of her impossible dream stood defiant against the coming storm. 4 walls of river stone, a roof barely begun, and no congregation to speak of. They'd called her foolish for 2 years, called her worse when her husband's accident left her alone with nothing but debt and this stubborn vision. Now the sky was falling, and every other building in Redemption Flats was timber and hope. Only her stones would stand. She could walk away, let them face what was coming with the same scorn they'd shown her. But Hazel Pritchard had never been good at walking away. She raised her hammer and drove another nail home, the sound swallowed by thunder that shook the earth. 2 years earlier, the first stone went into the ground on a Tuesday morning when the rest of Redemption Flats was still sleeping off Monday's drink. Hazel had risen before dawn, as she always did now, because sleep brought dreams of Nathaniel, the way he'd looked at her that last morning before the mineshaft collapsed, how he'd promised to be home for supper. Promises were kindling now. She burned through them to keep moving. The plot sat at the eastern edge of town, where the Kansas prairie met the first struggling attempts at civilization. Most folks thought the land was cursed. 3 businesses had failed there in 5 years, but Hazel saw what others missed: solid bedrock, 6 feet down, a natural spring that never ran dry, and a view that took in the whole valley. "You've gone mad with grief," Adeline Greer had said, her shopkeeper's smile thin as paper. "A woman alone has no business building anything, let alone a church." But Hazel wasn't asking permission. She drove the first stake herself, string-pulled taut between 4 corners that existed only in her mind. The building inspector, Amos Turnbull, a rail-thin man with tobacco-stained teeth, had laughed when she filed the papers. "You know how to lay stone, Mrs. Pritchard?" "I'll learn." "You know how to frame a roof?" "I'll learn that too." He'd signed the permit with a flourish that made it clear he expected to tear it up within a month. "Well, it's your money to waste. What's left of it anyway?" What was left wasn't much. The mine company had paid out Nathaniel's death benefit. $300 for a man's life, like you could weigh a soul on a scale. After settling his debts to the company store, she had $247, a mule named Josephine, and a stubborn heart that refused to break clean. The stones came from the river, each one carried by hand or dragged in Josephine's cart. Hazel worked through that first spring like a woman possessed, her hands bleeding through cotton gloves, her back teaching her new definitions of pain. She learned to read stone, which would split wrong, which would bear weight, which were just pretty faces hiding weakness. By summer, she had a foundation. The town watched like vultures circling something not quite dead. Men gathered at Pritchard's saloon, no relation, though the owner, Silas Pritchard, made sure everyone knew it, and laid bets on when she'd give up. 2 weeks, said Vernon Hastings, who ran the telegraph office. She'll run out of money. Month at most, added Clyde Morrison, the banker's son. No woman can do that kind of labor. She'll break herself. Only one voice spoke different. Eli Vance, the town schoolteacher, set his whiskey down with enough force to silence the others. Maybe she'll surprise you. She's building a church, Silas laughed. We already got a church. Reverend Walsh holds service in the town hall every Sunday, same as always. Maybe she's building something else, Eli said quietly, and left his drink unfinished on the bar. Autumn brought the first walls rising from the earth. Hazel had taught herself masonry from a book ordered from Denver, its pages now warped with sweat and river water. Each stone fit against its neighbor, like pieces of a puzzle only she could see. The work was slow. Some days she placed only 12 stones, testing each one for level, for strength, for truth. Young Willa Carmichael started coming by after school, a girl of 14 with her father's red hair and her mother's curiosity. She'd watch from a safe distance until Hazel finally called out. You planning to help or just supervise? Willa came closer, shy but hungry. Mama says I shouldn't bother you. Are you bothering me? Don't think so. I'm just watching. Watching is the first part of learning. That afternoon, Hazel taught her to mix mortar, to test its consistency, to spread it smooth. Willa came back the next day, and the next. Her mother, Ruth Carmichael, came looking for her that Friday, ready with sharp words that died when she saw her daughter laughing. Actually laughing, for the first time since her baby brother had succumbed to fever that summer. She can keep coming, Ruth said quietly. If you'll have her. I'll have her. Winter nearly broke them both. Kansas winter was a living thing with teeth, and it bit deep. Hazel couldn't work the mortar when it froze, couldn't lay stone when her hands shook too hard to grip. She spent those months cutting timber for the roof, learning carpentry with the same grim determination she'd brought to masonry. The town's amusement curdled into something meaner. Her credit dried up at the general store. Someone painted Widow's Folly on her half-built walls in February, the letters crude but clear. She scrubbed them off and kept working. Spring came again, and with it, the roof began to take shape. Hazel had figured the angles, cut the beams, and now she needed height. She built scaffolding from scrap lumber Eli Vance mysteriously left in her lot one night, no note attached. By the second summer, the church had walls and a roof frame. The bell tower rose at the western end, empty but waiting. Hazel spent her last money on proper roofing shingles, turning down Adeline Greer's offer to extend her credit. Pride's a cold companion, Adeline said. So is charity. It's not charity, it's business. It's leverage, Hazel corrected, and I'm done being leveraged. She sold Nathaniel's pocket watch instead, the only thing of value she had left. The jeweler in the next town over gave her $60 for a timepiece, worth twice that, but it was enough for shingles and nails, and the last of what she needed. On a Sunday morning in August, 2 years and 4 months after she'd driven that first stake, Hazel Pritchard climbed down from her roof and stood before her completed church. It had no pews yet, no pulpit, no stained glass or fancy fixtures. But the walls were solid stone, the roof was sound, and the door opened on hinges she'd forged herself at Eli's school workshop. The town didn't come to see. Reverend Walsh preached his sermon in the town hall as always, and most of Redemption Flats attended. But Hazel sat alone in her church, in the cool stone silence, and felt something she'd lost when Nathaniel died. She felt ready. September came to Kansas like an apology. All golden light and gentle winds. The crops stood tall in the fields around Redemption Flats, promising a harvest that might finally break even for the struggling farmers. Hazel had started holding her own services, though calling them services felt generous. She'd open the doors Sunday morning, and sometimes Willa would come. Occasionally, Ruth Carmichael brought her youngest daughter, Ada, who'd been born that spring. Eli Vance appeared once, sat in the back, and left without speaking. No one else came. "You built a church nobody wants," Silas Pritchard told her at the general store, where she was buying lamp oil. "Waste of 2 years. "I built what needed building," Hazel said. "Walsh's services are good enough for the rest of us. Then attend them in peace." But Reverend Walsh himself was less certain. He appeared at her door on a Wednesday afternoon, a soft man with softer hands and eyes that couldn't quite meet hers. "Mrs. Pritchard, I want you to know I hold no ill will about your project." Wasn't asking for your blessing. Nevertheless, he cleared his throat. "Some in town feel you're causing division, that perhaps your efforts might be better spent in support of the existing congregation." "You mean shut down and fall in line?" "I mean we're a small community. We can't afford schisms." Hazel leaned against her doorframe, exhausted from a day spent building benches. "Reverend, I'm not trying to take anything from you. I'm just trying to build something that will last." "Buildings aren't what last, Mrs. Pritchard. Faith lasts." "Faith lives in people," she said. "But people need shelter. Remember that when the weather turns." He left, looking troubled, and Hazel regretted her sharpness. She'd never been good with gentle words. Nathaniel had been the diplomat in their marriage. She was just the stubborn one who kept moving forward. The first warning came 3 days later. Old Thomas Weatherby had been predicting storms since before Hazel was born, reading the sky like scripture. He found her replacing the hinges on the church door, her hands black with grease. "Storm coming," he said without preamble. "Always storms coming, Thomas. Not like this one." His rheumy eyes fixed on the horizon. "I've seen 3 in my life that felt like this. 2 of them killed people." Hazel set down her wrench. "What are you feeling?" "The quiet. You hear it?" She listened. He was right. The usual prairie sounds had faded. No birds, no insect hum, just wind moving through grass with a whisper that raised hair on her neck. "Pressure's wrong," Thomas continued. "Been dropping for 2 days. And look there." He pointed east, where clouds were building like distant mountains. "That's not rain coming, that's war." "When?" 3 days, maybe 4. He touched his hat brim. You built good walls, Hazel. Might want to tell folks they're welcome to shelter here when it hits. They won't come. They think I'm foolish. They'll come when they're scared enough. Question is whether you'll let them in. He walked away, leaving Hazel staring at those distant clouds. That evening, she went to the town hall where the council met monthly. Mayor Douglas Pettigrew, a man whose authority came more from volume than wisdom, was holding forth about the need for a new water tower. "Excuse me," Hazel said from the back. The room fell silent. She rarely attended these meetings, had no vote anyway, being female and alone. "Mrs. Pritchard," Pettigrew said with false warmth, "how kind of you to join us. Thomas Weatherby says there's a bad storm coming, 3, maybe 4 days out. Thomas says that every autumn. This time he means it. I saw the clouds myself." Vernon Hastings laughed. "What do you want us to do, Mrs. Pritchard? Stop the weather?" "I want you to prepare. Make sure people know where to take shelter. Most of the buildings in town are timber frame. If the wind gets bad enough, we'll shelter in the town hall, same as always," Pettigrew interrupted. "This building has stood for 20 years. Hazel looked at the timber walls, the high windows, the roof that already leaked in normal rain. It won't be enough. "Are you offering your little church?" Adeline Greer asked, and there was amusement in her voice. "The building we all said would fall down in the first strong wind? I'm offering stone walls and a solid roof. Take it or don't." "We'll take our chances here," Pettigrew said. "But thank you for your concern." She left feeling like a fool, but Thomas found her on the walk home. "Tried to warn them." "Yes." "They listen?" "No." He nodded, unsurprised. "Never do, until it's too late. You just keep your door unlocked, girl. They'll come." The next day brought more signs. The temperature dropped 15 degrees overnight. The horses grew skittish, refusing to leave their stables. Dogs howled at nothing, and the chickens stopped laying. Hazel spent the day reinforcing her roof, checking every nail, every shingle. Willa came to help, and this time Ruth stayed too, bringing sandwiches and coffee. "You really think it's going to be bad?" Ruth asked, watching the sky. "Thomas does, and I trust Thomas." "My house is just timber and hope," Ruth said quietly. "If it gets bad, come here, bring the girls, bring anyone who'll listen." That evening, Eli Vance appeared with a wagon full of supplies, blankets, water barrels, dried goods. He started unloading without explanation. "Eli, I've been in a tornado," he said, cutting her off. "Tennessee when I was 12. Sounded like the world ending. Turned our barn to matchsticks and threw a piece of straw clean through an oak plank." He set down a barrel with a thud. "Your walls are the only ones in town that might stand it. The town hall will fold like a house of cards. You know it. I know it. Pettigrew knows it. But he's too proud to admit a woman built something stronger than he did." They worked until dark, stocking the church with supplies. When they finished, Eli stood in the doorway, looking at what Hazel had built. "It's good work," he said. "Nathaniel would be proud." Her throat tightened. "How do you know him?" "We worked together before the mine. He talked about you like you hung the moon." Eli smiled slightly. Said you were the strongest person he'd ever met. Too stubborn to quit anything, even when you should. He was right about the stubborn part. About all of it, I think. The second day brought wind. Not the storm yet, but its herald. The temperature kept dropping. Hazel looked at her thermometer and frowned. 58 degrees in September, and still falling. At noon, the sky turned an ugly green-gray. People started appearing at her door. First came the Carmichaels, Ruth with both daughters and a husband, Isaac, who looked embarrassed but determined, then the Weatherbys, Thomas and his wife Margaret, then Eli with 6 of his students whose families lived too far out to reach in time. "Can we?" Ruth started. "Inside," Hazel said. "All of you." By evening, 20 people huddled in the church. Some brought food, others brought blankets. They eyed each other awkwardly. Half hadn't spoken to Hazel in 2 years, and now they needed her walls. Pettigrew appeared at sunset, Reverend Walsh beside him. "Mrs. Pritchard," the mayor began, his bluster gone, "we've decided to evacuate the town hall. Thought your building might offer suitable shelter. For everyone, for those who wish to come. Then they're welcome." Within an hour, 60 people crowded into the church. The building Hazel had constructed for worship now served a different purpose entirely: survival. Silas Pritchard came, looking sour. Adeline Greer and her husband Arnold. Vernon Hastings with the telegraph keys, insisting he might need them. Families with children, old folks who could barely walk, everyone carrying what they could save. Photographs, jewelry, deeds to land that might not exist tomorrow. Hazel moved among them, organizing, the families with young children near the center, away from walls, the elderly given the few chairs she'd built. Supplies distributed, water rationed, everyone given a task to keep panic at bay. "You're good at this," Eli said quietly, watching her work. "Had practice managing a household. This is just larger." "This is leadership." She didn't answer, because the wind was picking up, and through the high window near the bell tower, she could see the clouds racing closer, a wall of darkness that blotted out the stars. The storm hit at midnight like God's own hammer. One moment, eerie silence. The next, a sound Hazel would never forget. A freight train made of rage and wind, bearing down on Redemption Flats with murder in mind. The church walls shook. Dust fell from the rafters. Children started crying, and mothers pulled them close. The wind's scream rose higher, a pitch that hurt the ears and scraped the soul. "Everyone away from the windows!" Hazel shouted, but her voice was barely audible. Eli was already moving, herding people toward the center of the church. Thomas Weatherby had his arms around his wife, his face gray but calm. This was the storm he'd warned about, and being right brought no satisfaction. The first window shattered, the one near the door. Glass exploded inward, and the wind followed like a living thing, whipping through the church with savage strength. Papers flew, blankets billowed, people screamed. Hazel grabbed one of Eli's students, a boy of 10 who'd frozen in terror, and hauled him toward the center. Willa appeared beside her, helping with the younger children, her face pale but steady. Another window burst, then another. The wind howled through the openings, but the walls held. Outside, Redemption Flats was being torn apart. Through the broken windows, in lightning flashes, they saw buildings collapse. The general store's roof peeled away like paper. The saloon's false front simply vanished. The town hall, Mayor Pettigrew's proud structure, folded in on itself with a crack that carried over the storm's roar. If they'd stayed there, they'd all be dead. "The roof!" someone shouted. "The roof's coming off!" But Hazel had built it true. She'd used twice as many nails as the plans called for, had tied the rafters down with steel cable she'd bought with the last of her money. The roof groaned, shifted, threatened, but held. The storm lasted 3 hours, though it felt like 3 lifetimes. Wind hammered at the stone walls, testing every mortar joint, every fitted stone. Rain came sideways through the broken windows, soaking everyone near the edges. But the walls stood. Hazel spent those 3 hours moving through the darkness with a lamp, checking for cracks, for weakness, for any sign her church might fail. She found none. The stones that she'd carried from the river, that she'd lifted and placed and fitted with bleeding hands, they remembered their purpose. They held. When the wind finally died, the silence was deafening. Dawn came grey and cold, revealing what was left of Redemption Flats. Hazel opened the church door, miraculously still on its hinges, and stepped into a different world. The main street was a river of mud and debris. Buildings stood like broken teeth, roofless and skeletal. The general store was gone entirely, just a foundation full of wreckage. The saloon's walls leaned at impossible angles. Every home on the south side had lost at least its roof, and several had vanished completely. The church stood alone, intact, defiant. People emerged slowly, blinking in the weak sunlight. Children who'd been silent with terror now pointed at the destruction, trying to understand. Adults looked around with the numb expression of those who've survived, but don't quite believe it yet. "My house," Ruth Carmichael whispered, staring at where her home had been. Only the stone chimney remained, standing alone like a gravestone. Others echoed her. "My shop, my barn, everything." But they were alive. Mayor Pettigrew stood in the doorway, staring at the town hall's ruins. His proud building was now kindling. If they'd sheltered there as he'd wanted, they'd have been crushed when it collapsed. "You saved us," he said to Hazel, his voice strange and small. "The building saved us. You built the building." She didn't know what to say to that, so she said nothing. The next days blurred together. The church became more than shelter. It became home, headquarters, hospital. Hazel organized work crews, assigned tasks, coordinated the massive effort of rebuilding. Eli turned the church into a schoolhouse during the day, teaching the children while adults worked on salvage. Ruth and several other women set up a kitchen, cooking communal meals over fires outside. Thomas Weatherby, whose weather prediction had saved their lives, became the unofficial foreman of construction crews. People who'd mocked Hazel for 2 years now looked to her for direction. She found herself settling disputes, allocating resources, making decisions that affected everyone. The widow they'd dismissed was now the foundation around which the town reorganized itself. Silas Pritchard approached her one morning, hat in hands. "I was wrong," he said simply. "About you. About this place. I'm sorry." Others echoed him. Adeline Greer brought her ledgers from the store's ruins, wanting to restart business from the church. Vernon Hastings set up the telegraph in one corner, reconnecting them to the outside world. Word spread of their survival, and aid began arriving from neighboring towns. Through it all, the stone walls stood strong. One evening, 3 weeks after the storm, Hazel stood alone in the church after everyone else had bedded down for the night. She walked the perimeter, trailing her fingers along the walls, remembering every stone. This one had nearly broken her back. That one had taken an hour to fit properly. Here was where Willa had helped her mix mortar for the first time. Couldn't sleep either. Eli stood in the doorway, silhouetted against the rebuilt main street beyond. The town was rising again, timber by timber, but it would be months before people could return to their homes. "Just thinking," Hazel said, about how I built this for worship, and it became something else entirely." Eli walked closer. "Maybe that is worship, building something that protects people." Nathaniel would have liked that thought. He'd have liked what you've become. Hazel turned to him. "What have I become?" "The person this town needed, the one they didn't know they were missing." She felt tears threaten and pushed them down. "I just wanted to build something that would last." "You did." Eli gestured at the walls, at the sleeping townspeople, at the community that had reformed itself around her impossible dream. "You absolutely did." Winter came early that year, and with it, decisions that would reshape Redemption Flats forever. The church couldn't house everyone through the cold months. Space and supplies would run thin. But the town hall was gone, and Mayor Pettigrew's house had lost its entire second floor. The question became, where would they rebuild? The answer surprised everyone, including Hazel. At a town meeting held inside the church, now the only building large enough to hold everyone, Pettigrew stood and made a proposal. "We've been thinking about this wrong," he said, "trying to put everything back the way it was. But the storm showed us something important. It showed us what lasts and what doesn't." He gestured at the stone walls around them. "Mrs. Pritchard spent 2 years building something the right way, and it saved our lives. Meanwhile, we threw up timber and hope, and the wind erased us like we were never here. I propose we rebuild differently. We rebuild around this." Eli stood. "You mean use the church as a town center?" "I mean more than that. I mean we learn from what Hazel built. Stone foundations, real craftsmanship, buildings that will stand another 100 years. That takes time," Arnold Greer said, "and money we don't have." "So we take time," Thomas Weatherby said, standing with effort, "and we pool what we have. We build one proper building at a time, instead of 10 cheap ones that'll blow away in the next storm." The debate lasted hours, but in the end, the vote was unanimous. Redemption Flats would rebuild, but this time with intention, with care, with the kind of stubborn determination that Hazel Pritchard had shown them was possible. That winter, work began in earnest. Under Hazel's guidance, for who else knew stone and mortar like she did? crews started constructing a new general store beside the church. Then a new town hall, this one with stone walls 2 feet thick. Then a school building that could double as a shelter if another storm came. Hazel found herself teaching masonry to 20 people who'd once laughed at her efforts. She showed them how to read stone, how to test mortar, how to build something that would outlast them all. Willa became her apprentice in truth, learning the trade with the fierce dedication of the young. "You're building a legacy," Ruth told her one evening, watching Hazel sketch plans for a community granary. "I'm just building buildings. You're building a town that will remember who saved it. When our grandchildren walk these streets, they'll know your name." Hazel looked around at the work in progress, the stone walls rising, the careful construction, the community that had formed around a shared purpose. "I just wanted to build a church," she said softly. "You built more than that. You built hope." Spring brought new arrivals, families who'd heard about the town that survived, that rebuilt with stone and stubborn pride. The population of Redemption Flats grew. New businesses opened in buildings that would stand against any wind. And at the center of it all, the church that started it continued to serve as meeting hall, shelter, symbol. On a Sunday morning in April, nearly 2 years after the storm, Hazel held her first real service. The church was packed, not because people felt obligated, but because they wanted to be there, in the building that had saved them, with the woman who'd refused to give up even when everyone said she should. Reverend Walsh had moved to another town, but Eli Vance stepped forward to lead the gathering. He wasn't ordained, but that seemed less important now. "We're here because of stubbornness," he began, and quiet laughter rippled through the crowd. "Because one woman wouldn't listen when we told her she was wasting her time. Because she built something impossible, and it became possible, and then it became necessary." He looked at Hazel, standing in the back as always. "The greatest buildings aren't constructed from plans or measurements. They're built from vision, from sacrifice, from the kind of courage that keeps hammering nails even when your hands bleed and everyone says you'll fail." Hazel Pritchard showed us what that looks like. And then, when the worst happened, she showed us something else. That the things we build with love and determination will shelter us when nothing else can. After the service, as people filed out into the spring sunshine, Mayor Pettigrew approached with a bronze plaque. "The council commissioned this," he said, showing her. It read, "Pritchard Memorial Church, built 1873-1875 by Hazel Pritchard, Foundation of Redemption Flats. May these walls always stand as shelter for those in need." "Memorial?" Hazel asked. "I'm not dead yet." "It's not a grave marker. It's a monument to what you started here." He smiled. "Besides, we figured you'd argue if we just called it Hazel's Church." "You figured right." They mounted the plaque beside the door, and Hazel stood back to look at it. Nathaniel's name wasn't there. This was hers alone, her work, her vision made real. She felt his absence like always, but also felt something new. Pride, maybe. Or peace. "He'd be proud," Eli said quietly, appearing beside her. "Think so?" "No so. You took the worst thing that ever happened to you and turned it into something that saved lives. Not everyone could do that." Hazel looked at the church, at the town rising around it, at the people who'd become more than neighbors. They'd become a community, forged in storm and stone. "I just kept building," she said. "Sometimes that's enough. Sometimes that's everything." 20 years later, Redemption Flats had become something rare in Kansas. A town built to last. Every major building was stone, every foundation deep and true. The population had grown to nearly 1,000, and people came from other towns to learn the building techniques that had started with one widow's stubborn vision. Hazel was 60 now, her hands gnarled with arthritis but still strong. She walked through town most evenings, checking the construction of new buildings with the critical eye of experience. Willa ran the town's construction company now, employing 15 people and teaching the next generation how to build right. The church still stood at the center of everything, though it had been expanded twice to accommodate the growing congregation. The original walls remained, those first stones that Hazel had placed with bleeding hands, and they anchored everything that came after. On this particular evening, Hazel sat on the church steps, watching the sunset paint the prairie gold. Eli joined her, moving slower these days, but still present, still steady. "You ever regret it?" he asked. "All that work?" "Every day," Hazel said. "And not once." He laughed. "That's very you. It was worth it, though, not just the building, but what it taught everyone, that if you build something right, if you refuse to cut corners or give up, it will stand. That matters. Your stubbornness saved a town." "My stubbornness annoyed a town. The building saved it." "You built the building," Hazel smiled. "We've had this argument before. We'll have it again." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun dropped below the horizon. Around them, Redemption Flats settled into evening, lights appearing in windows, families gathering for supper, the ordinary rhythms of a town that had survived because one person refused to quit. "You know what I think?" Eli said finally. "I think you didn't just build a church, you built a lesson. You showed everyone that the impossible becomes possible if you're stubborn enough to keep trying." That's a heavy burden for some stones and mortar. Those stones and mortar saved 60 lives, started a better town, and gave people hope when they had nothing else. He looked at her. "That's not a burden. That's a legacy." Hazel thought about Nathaniel, about the life they'd planned that never happened, about the unexpected path that had led her here. She thought about every stone she'd carried, every nail she'd hammered, every moment she'd wanted to quit, but hadn't. "I just wanted to build something that would last," she said again, the same words she'd spoken to herself 1,000 times. "You did," Eli said simply. "You absolutely did." As darkness fell over Kansas, the church stood solid and real against the stars. Not just a building, but a testament to stubborn courage, to the power of vision over doubt, and to the truth that sometimes one person, refusing to give up, can shelter a whole town from the storm. The walls would stand for another 100 years, but the lesson they taught would last forever.